Imagine opening your eyes, but you're no longer in your bed. You're in a place suspended between darkness and light, and in front of you there are doors, guardians, formulas to recite, and a divine court ready to judge you. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the end, it was a journey, often difficult and full of obstacles. And like any dangerous journey, you needed a guide. Except this guide wasn't a map, it was a real survival manual for the afterlife. Today we know it as the Book of the Dead. First key point, Book of the Dead is a modern name. The closest ancient title is often translated as coming forth by day or going forth into the light of day. The idea isn't death, it's returning to light, to eternal life. And it wasn't one single book, identical for everyone. It was a collection of texts, spells, prayers, instructions, chapters that could vary from person to person. Some scrolls were extremely long and richly illustrated, others shorter and more standardized. It was usually written on papyrus and placed in the tomb, close to the deceased, to accompany them through the passage. And yes, it was also a status symbol. The richer you were, the more you could afford a long papyrus, beautifully painted, full of vignettes, with your name inserted into the formulas. A famous example is the Papyrus of Ani, preserved at the British Museum, one of the most celebrated and illustrated books of the dead ever to reach us. But what was really inside? If I had to describe it with a modern image, I'd say a survival kit, with instructions, passwords, and emergency procedures for the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that knowing the right words, the right names, and following the right steps was essential to overcome obstacles after death. And here's the most interesting part, for them, words weren't just sounds or poetry. Words did things. Words were action. Inside the Book of the Dead, you find different types of content. The first major block is protection. There are spells against dangers, hostile entities, serpents, traps, everything that could threaten the soul in the underworld. This isn't fantasy, it's religion practiced in an extremely concrete way. If you know what to say, you pass. If you don't, you risk being trapped or destroyed. Then there's orientation. There are chapters meant to help you navigate, crossing regions, recognizing gates, speaking to guardians. And above all, knowing names. In the Egyptian mindset, knowing the name of something means having power over it. So the Book of the Dead isn't just spiritual comfort, it's also access, like it gives you the credentials to move forward. Another powerful theme is transformation. Some spells allow the deceased to take on different forms, to become a bird, a lotus, a luminous being, or to draw symbolically closer to the gods. The goal isn't only to avoid danger, it's to be reborn, to move freely, not to remain a fragile and passive presence. And then we reach the heart of the Book of the Dead, judgment. The most iconic scene is the weighing of the heart, linked to the famous spell /chapter 125. At the Metropolitan Museum, there are papyri and explanations that show this step clearly. The deceased enters the Hall of Judgment, and their heart is weighed against Ma'at, the symbol of truth and cosmic order, often represented by a feather. If the heart is heavy with wrongdoing, you don't obtain eternal life. And here comes something incredibly powerful. In the Book of the Dead you find real declarations, almost a kind of moral defense, before the divine tribunal. It's not a trial like we imagine it today, but the concept is similar. Your life is evaluated, and you must prove you lived according to the order of Ma'at. There's also a fascinating detail. For the Egyptians, the heart wasn't just an organ. It was the seat of memory, thought, and moral values. That's why it wasn't removed during mummification, and why it becomes central in judgment. At the Met, for example, they explain how certain amulets, like heart scarabs, were linked to specific Book of the Dead spells that ask the heart not to testify against the deceased during the judgment. If you pass judgment, you don't go to an abstract heaven. You go to a very concrete paradise, often called the Field of Yeru, the Field of Reeds, an ideal version of Egypt, where life continues in harmony, abundance, and order. The Papyrus of Ani, for example, includes scenes connected to this post-judgment dimension, life in the afterlife after the trial is overcome. Now the real question of the video, why was it considered powerful? Because in the Egyptian worldview, the Book of the Dead wasn't a symbol. It was a spiritual technology, a combination of religion, ritual, and what we would call magic, where the written and spoken word produces effects. The book protects you, orients you, transforms you, prepares you for judgment, and helps you come forth into the light of day. And above all, it doesn't come from nowhere. It's the result of a very long evolution of funerary texts, like the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, which over time were reorganized and expanded until they became what we call the Book of the Dead. So yes, powerful, and not because it was a magic wand, but because for the Egyptians it truly meant the difference between being trapped in the chaos of the afterlife, or obtaining an eternal existence, ordered, luminous, and real. And the most incredible thing is, we don't have just one Book of the Dead. We have many versions, personal, different, adapted. And every new discovery can change the way we understand Egyptian religion, fears, hopes, and even that civilization's idea of a justice. Deep dive, recent discoveries, and why they matter. In recent years, there have been important discoveries and updates related to Book of the Dead papyri, and what's interesting is that it's not only about finding a papyrus, but also about preserving it, studying it, and making it readable for the public. One of the best-known news stories is the so-called Waziri papyrus, a papyrus about 16 meters long, found at Saqqara in 2022, and then publicly presented and highlighted in 2023. In particular, during the opening of a renewed section of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, Tahrir area, this papyrus was presented as a central piece and described as containing around 113 spells of the Book of the Dead. These finds are rare because long papyri in good condition don't preserve easily, and each scroll can contain selections and combinations of spells that are extremely useful for understanding how funerary equipment was personalized. Another widely discussed discovery is connected to a New Kingdom necropolis in the Tuna El Gebel/Al Gharafa area, Minya Governorate, announced in 2023. Here, reports mention a papyrus around 13 to 15 meters, associated with the Book of the Dead, found in remarkable condition alongside mummies, coffins, amulets, and a very large number of Ashabdi figurines. The value of this kind of discovery is double. On one hand, it increases the number of real witnesses of the text, physical copies. On the other, it connects a papyrus to a precise archaeological context, helping us understand who used it, in which area, and with what local traditions. Finally, there's a type of discovery that's less spectacular but extremely important: scientific study and museum presentation of papyri already known. A close example is the Egyptian Museum of Turin, which launched analysis and research projects on the Book of the Dead of Ka, a papyrus about 14 meters long, work that includes research, documentation, and public presentation. And in 2025, the same museum communicated updates about the reinstallation/enhancement of the gallery dedicated to Ka and Merit, with explanatory materials along the entire length of the papyrus, a modern way to make readable an object that is, in practice, a very long book in scroll form.